will stop sin, isn't it? I don't believe we'll ever stop sinning because it hurts us. But when we see that it hurts Jesus, that's when we will stop. Well, our assigned topic for this month is on marriage. There's probably a pretty good selection from this audience that are not married. But as I was looking at some statistics on the internet, only about 10% of Americans don't get married at some time or other. So it's really a pretty small number. 90% of people at some time or other get married. So I believe what we're going to study tonight is able to be of help to everyone here, if you will let it. Unless you know that you've given up the idea of marriage and you never are going to yield to the idea. But you know, I've known some people that were pretty set on not getting married and they ended up getting married. So you might want to pay attention anyway, even if you don't think you will. I've entitled this, Until Death Do Us Part. Now, I have noticed that some weddings are leaving that out nowadays, but it's still, I think, in Christian weddings, it's pretty much across the board that promise is made, but unfortunately, we have to ask the question, can you keep your promise? Well, not in your own strength, of course, you can't. But the question is, can you keep it with the help of Jesus? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people are saying, no, we can't even keep it with the help of Jesus. So they give up and have divorce. Jesus had something to say here. And it's found in Matthew 19, verse 3. And I guess it wasn't him that decided to bring up the topic, but he discussed it anyway. In Matthew 19, verse 3, it says, the Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Now, I think our society, and unfortunately many within the church, are coming to the same conclusion that it's okay to put away a wife for any cause. And so that's the way it was in the time of Jesus. And they thought, well, we can trap him on this one because we know what Moses said, and we're going to ask what Jesus has to say about this. Is it okay to leave your partner for any cause? Here's Jesus' answer in Matthew 19, 4-6. And he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Now you might say, Pastor Ed, what are you talking about divorce? We're supposed to be talking about marriage. The reason is the time to consider divorce, the possibility of divorce, is before you get married. After you're married, you don't think about divorce. Now, I realize unless two people are willing to stay together, you may get a divorce when you didn't want one. But the time to consider divorce, the danger of divorce, the statistics on divorce and all the rest is beforehand. And the reason is, then when you get married, you'll be more careful. The problem why so many divorces exist is because we're not careful about getting married. And so we need to consider it. In my class on courtship, I always cover divorce and show you exactly how God looks at it, because what I'm hoping is that you will think seriously about who you marry. Well, Jesus gives some principles. We'll talk about those in a minute. The first one, and supposed to have gone one at a time up there, but anyway. The first principle that Jesus is stressing, which is, people are getting mixed up about this, is that marriage is between a male and a female. He said that in Genesis. He said it again to the Pharisees. Marriage was made by God to be between a male and a female. Second principle. People that get married must have a closer relationship with their spouse than with their parents. This has destroyed many marriages. You've heard of the idea maybe that the young man could not cut the apron strings. And it means that he was too tied to his mother. And his wife got frustrated with him being too tied to his mother. Jesus made it very clear. When you get married, you leave your father and your mother, and you join yourself to your partner. Now, it doesn't mean you ignore your parents or treat them bad at all, but you must have a closer relationship with your spouse than with your parents. For me, it was easy. My wife's father abandoned them. She didn't even know where he was till we were married many years. And her mother had passed away. And so, I never have had that struggle. But I know some people do with their spouse. Third principle. Marriage should produce oneness. If oneness takes place, you won't be thinking about divorce, because it's such a good experience. It's such a wonderful relationship, that oneness. And the oneness is to be similar to the oneness that we can have with Jesus. It's not, of course, on the same level, but it's similar. Number 4, God must be the one to put it together. If God doesn't put it together, you really are in danger. Now, I couldn't fit into here everything I would have liked, but hopefully you've read the fact that if you say later on, well, God didn't put us together, you still can't divorce. Because there was a time you thought God put you together. And if you thought God put you together, you have to stick with it. And if we had time, I could show that to you from the Word of God. But how much better to make sure that God did put us together if we get married. And number 5, man is not to reverse what God does. Now, I imagine those Pharisees, after they asked the question and they heard the answer, it kind of set them back. And they thought, wow, that's way different than we thought it was. And I think most people today would be shocked if that was presented clearly and plainly today. And they would say, oh, you're just twisting the scripture. You're a hard taskmaster. You're making out God to be a really hard taskmaster. If you're not happy, you should be able to divorce and get somebody else. That's the philosophy that's being presented today. But I don't find that in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Well, that's what they said next in verse 7. They say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? Imagine they thought, we got him. We got him. He is not saying what Moses said. Now, with Moses, they honored Moses above Jesus, of course, above anybody, really. Moses was their most wonderful prophet, they felt. But you know, the truth is, if you don't accept all the prophets, and Jesus was a prophet, if you don't accept all the prophets, you don't accept any of them. That's the truth of it. So they didn't accept Moses, but they thought they did. And they thought they caught Jesus saying one thing and Moses saying another. But Jesus spoke again in verses 8 and 9. He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. Now, think about the words carefully. Why was divorce allowed through Moses? The hardness of their hearts. How far away from God they had gone. And that's why God said, okay, I know you can't handle this idea, so if you do it legally, you can get a divorce. But after he said you can't go back, if you once divorced, you can't go back to the one that you divorced. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, commits adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. So, he makes it pretty plain, and there's a lot of ways that people try to get around that today. They take the text where Jesus said, if you look upon a woman to lust after her in your heart, you've committed adultery. And they say, well, you know, since this marriage is not working, probably they looked at somebody and lusted after them, so they can get a divorce and marry somebody else. And on these rationalizations go. But Jesus said very plainly, if they didn't commit adultery, then you don't have the right to leave them. And if you examine everything that's said, even adultery does not automatically mean that a divorce is the right thing to do, or that that's what God wants you to do. But we don't have time to look at all those details. Now, here are some fairly up-to-date statistics in regard to the divorce rate in this country. I found this one in in the Psychology Today magazine of February 2, it should be 2017 there. And this doctor by the name of Bella DiPaolo, she asked the question and then she answered it in the article. What is the divorce rate really? Now, on the internet, you can find all kinds of views on that. And I looked at a bunch of them. But this one I thought was the most accurate. She said, Amato, he's someone that studied the divorce rate a lot, believes that today's lifetime risk of divorce is between 42 and 45%. And if you throw in permanent separations that don't end in divorce, then the overall likelihood of marital disruption is pushing 50%. Now, I would like to add one more detail, that it probably would be difficult to establish accurately, because even if we do it anonymously, people don't always like to admit the truth. But I would love to do a study of my own. And I would ask questions to find out how many homes that stay together have a lot of unhappiness. They have unhappiness because there's a lot of shouting and hollering and unkind treatment. And yeah, they have their happy times. They have times that, it's good, but they have a lot of the other in their home. I have a feeling it's a pretty good percentage of people that really don't become one, and they don't really find marriage something that really makes them happy. And if we added that to the almost 50% divorce rate because they finally say, I've had enough. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I've had enough. I'm out of here. It might be more like 70 or 80% of people that are not really happy in marriage. So I want to spend the rest of the time thinking about a little bit more on some statistics, but I want to spend the rest of the time on how to have a happy marriage. Now today the philosophy is, if you're not happy in marriage, divorce and get another partner. But notice this. This was published in October 30, 2012, American Psychological Association. And here's what they said. When you break that down by number of marriages, 41% of first marriages end in divorce. So his percentage is slightly lower than the other one. But notice this, 60% of second marriages end in divorce. So when people say, let's break it up, get married again, they have less chance to succeed. 60% of second marriages end in divorce. So then they marry again. 73% of third marriages end in divorce. What's the problem? You would have been ahead to make the first one work, because the problem is you, to a large degree. One person doesn't have all the blame, but unfortunately, when it breaks up, you probably weren't the nicest person to live with. And so it led to trouble and difficulty. So, how can you avoid divorce? I'm going to start with those that are single, because I believe that's where the foundation is laid. And plus, many of you are single here tonight. When you're in a courtship, leave out the physical attentions. What happens to most people is that the physical attentions feel so good that when they've been indulging in that, they want to get married after a while. And there's a lot of things that they're not able to think through because of how good it feels. Number 2, do adequate research. If you were going to start a business, you would probably do quite a bit of research because you wouldn't want to go bankrupt in your business. But it's amazing when people get married, they don't do any research. They make up all their mind on what they see. Isn't that incredible? And we have a tendency to put our best foot forward because we want the other person to like us, especially if they look attractive and so on. We think, wow, we got a good catch here. We need to behave well. But the problem is, they don't really find out who we are. So the only way, once you have established as a person that's interested in them, the only way you can research about them successfully is to ask the people that know them well. Parents, roommates, work supervisors, anybody that knows them well. And do lots of research to find out, what are they like? Now you're going to find some bad things, but just because they're bad things doesn't mean we don't get married. But what we're thinking about here is, can I handle that for 50 years? Can I put up with that for 50 years? Now, one person can put up with it and the other can't. And so you want to know whether you can or not. Third, pay attention to compatibility. That's what you're really looking for. How many points are we going to argue over? How many points are we going to be frustrated with each other about? No, there's very few marriages that don't have any, but you shouldn't have very many, 1, 2, or maybe at the most 3. But if you have many of them, you're probably not compatible. Number 4, through prayer, make sure God is leading. Because once you say that you are going to marry this person and then you follow through with it, you better be really sure that God is leading. Okay, let's look at the next step now. We're married. We've laid a good foundation so that we know we got the right one, or at least we got the one that God planned for us to get. So now, how are we going to stay married? Well, I think one of the biggest issues is commitment. Until death do us part. Don't marry anybody that's not willing to stay with you no matter what happens. And no matter what they find out about you. Don't marry anybody that's not that committed. Because guess what? Something will come along that will make them think that you're not the best one they don't want to be with. And so then you'll face the heartaches that go on through divorce or being abandoned. Number 2, be prepared to work. This idea that you get married and you live happily ever after is only true if you work. Most people don't work. They get married, they think they're always going to be happy, and they sail into marriage, and after a while, it starts not being so good, and some of them get some marriage counseling and start doing the work, and they save their marriage, but a lot of them, they never do the work, and so the marriage blows up and they get divorced. Here is a statement from Adventist Home, page 105. It says, to gain a proper understanding of the marriage relation is the work of a lifetime. So when we get married, we don't understand all there is about marriage, maybe even very little. Few couples are completely united when the marriage ceremony is performed. The real union of the two in wedlock is the work of the after years. Notice, I'm putting emphasis on the word work. It takes a lot of work, a lot of character development on the part of yourself in order to become a good partner. And Then, of course, there are relationships between the two of you that have to be worked out and smoothed out. But this work has to be done. If it is done, you will have the happiness that Jesus planned for you to have. But if you don't do the work, you probably will not, unless you're perfectly matched for each other. Number 3, your spouse's faults are for your development. Now, the normal human reaction is, I got to straighten out my partner. I got to get them to stop doing what bothers me. That is the way to defeat. That's the way to divorce. You have to say, God called me to marry them, and their faults are for my improvement, so that I can develop my Christian character rather than get irritated and frustrated over their faults. Adventist Home, page 105. Husband and wife learn each other's character as it was impossible to learn it in their previous association. So with all your checking, with all your investigation, with all your evaluation, you didn't find it out. In fact, you just might marry somebody that has a fault that in your mind you said, I don't ever want to marry somebody with that fault. And you find out, they have it. Because you find out things after marriage. That's the way it is. God doesn't reveal everything to you before marriage. Some of it you find out after marriage. Often they discern in each other unsuspected weaknesses and defects. Why didn't God let you know before? Because if you knew, you wouldn't get the polishing that you need to get. And so he didn't let you find that out, and later you found it out, and now it's for your growth and for your benefit. Number 4, there's 10 of these. Number 4, how to cope with faults. Everybody has them. You might not think so. You know, some people are largely oblivious to their faults. They're irritating people everywhere, and they think they have no faults. It's incredible. But we all have faults. So how to cope with faults? Especially in the other person, okay? How to cope with the faults of your spouse. This comes from Adventist Home 105. Let all seek to discover the excellencies rather than the defects. So, when you get married, now before you get married, keep your eyes open to what the defects are. But after you get married, you can't help but see some of them, but you need to train yourself to look for the good points. Let all seek to discover the excellencies rather than the defects. Now, the good news is, although everybody has faults, everybody has good points. And if you spend your time looking for their good points, you will find them, and they will be a blessing, and you will consider it a privilege to have married them. I'll share one. You know, I've got a wonderful wife. That's how come I can talk about marriage. And one of the things that I didn't know before we got married was how good she was in stretching the money to meet whatever needs existed. Now, I grew up in a very poor home and had to earn every dollar that I spent. And so I didn't have a lot of money to spend as a child. But as I got older, I got a good paying job. And, I started spending money fairly freely. And I was always in debt because I always wanted a new car. And so when I met her, I didn't know that God was going to lead us into self-supporting work. But you can't survive in self-supporting work if you don't know how to spend money. Plus, I didn't know that God was going to call us to pioneer for 8 years, where you think you don't have money at Wildwood. In pioneering, you really don't have money. And you have to live a whole year on close to nothing. Well, I discovered that she could do it. And I kind of let her take the lead with the finances because, in a marriage, the one that's the best is the one you ought to let do it. Don't worry about whether it's the man or the woman. It's not the issue. Who's going to do the best financially for your unit? Well, it was obvious to me she was the best, and so here we are. We have more money in the bank than when we started self-supporting work and spent 8 years there. But I have to give the credit to my wife for that carefulness. Plus, I've learned a lot from her about how to spend money. Another quote that's interesting, it says in Adventist Home 108, "Be quick to recognize the good qualities in each other." So don't be quick to recognize the faults, but be quick to recognize the good points. Number 5. Remember this. This is something very important, and I don't know that I've ever heard a marriage class that pointed this out. Adventist Home 105. Often, it is our own attitude, the atmosphere that surrounds ourselves, which determines what will be revealed in another. Now, if you stop to think about that, the faults that you see in your partner, if your partner had a different spouse, they might not show that fault. But they show the fault because of you. You bring it out in them. Something that you do causes that to come out in them. And if you're wise, you will accept your responsibility for what you are causing them to do. Now, they can't use that as an excuse and say, well, it's because my husband made me do this, or my wife made me do this. No, you can't do that. But nonetheless, it is true. Notice it again. Often it is our own attitude, the atmosphere that surrounds ourselves, which determines what will be revealed in another. If you can remember that, it will save you a lot of blaming and a lot of criticizing and a lot of moaning over the way they are. And you'll start looking for, what am I doing that's making them be like that? Number 6, don't listen to this. You will get it, but don't listen. Heavenly Places, page 203. We do not love each other as we supposed. That comes from Satan. Don't listen to that. Here's what we do. Expel it from the mind. Do not linger over it. I don't know whether there's a marriage that never had that thought put in their mind, but I doubt there's very many that at some point Satan put that idea in the mind. But if you don't think about it, you don't linger over it, it won't damage your marriage. 7, don't blame or find fault with your spouse. Heavenly Places, page 203. Be very careful that the husband does not take it upon himself to confess his wife's faults, or the wife her husband's. Now, it's okay to confess our own faults, but we are not to confess the faults of our partner. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a frank talk about something that's irritating to us. Yes, there is a place for that. However, if you try to discuss the fault of your partner too frequently, you will have trouble. Because marriage is such a close relationship, and we're so vulnerable because they know so much about us, that it is dangerous to do that very often. You're much ahead to pray about it and not be confessing, as it says here, the faults of your partner. Number 8, make sure you do your part. Adventist or Heavenly Places, page 203. Let each think, not after a sentimental order, how he or she can make the married life what God would be pleased to have it. You know, so many people, they think, well, I thought that the person I married was just going to make me so happy, and I was going to get treated so wonderfully, and it's not happening. That's what a lot of people do, and they start thinking along that line. That's not the way to think. Instead, we're to think, how can he or she make the married life what God would be pleased to have it? How can I make my partner happier? What can I do that will make them enjoy being married to me more than right now? And the ones that will focus in that direction will find their partner improves. Isn't that interesting? They will improve because you are making them happy. Be determined that you will be all that it is possible for you to be to each other. And the bonds of wedlock will be the most desirable of ties. I can honestly say, I am praising God that I married the wife that I have. Because the happiness that we have is, I believe, what God wanted marriages to have. But all these points have had their part in our marriage relationship. And it says in another way, Adventist Home, page 106, study to advance the happiness of each other. How can I make my wife happy? I think about that often. What can I do? Often I can't do all the things I would like to do, but I'm always thinking, what can I do that'll make her happier? I'll tell you one thing I did today. There were some clothes that weren't folded, and I saw that she was really rushing, trying to get ready for coming to Vespers, and so I took a few minutes to fold those clothes. I didn't really feel I had the time, but I knew it would make her happy. So that's the counsel here. Study to advance the happiness of each other. Number 9, watch your tones of voice. When I'm giving the class on marriage, I tell people, if you have to, record how you talk to each other. Because I am convinced that people use tones of voice that are like sandpaper on the other person, but they don't even know they're doing it. I've been in homes where I've heard it, and I thought to myself, they're going to get that other person stirred up pretty soon the way they're talking to them. Now, the words might not have been too bad, but it was the tone of voice that was being used. So we are to watch the tones of our voice. Notice Adventist Home, 435. And, by the way, Seventh-day Adventists ought to have the happiest homes on earth. With all the counsel we have, if we're studying it and trying to put it into practice, we should have the happiest homes on earth. It says, cultivate a soft and persuasive, not a harsh and dictatorial tone of voice. Soft, persuasive, we could put a lot of other words in there, kind, tones, and so on. And the last one, continue courting. Now, men are the worst at this, but both parties fall down on this. Before we get married, we do all kinds of things to spend time together, to make each other happy. And when we get married, we may do it for a little while, but pretty soon, life gets us busy with children perhaps, or with career and so on. And we're not doing those things anymore. We're wrapped up in other things. And it doesn't take a prophet to predict that the relationship is going to go down because we're not courting anymore. And that's why Adventist Home, page 106, says, continue the early attentions. In other words, it's not sex that makes marriage really good. It's the early attentions. It is all the nice things that get done for each other. That's what makes up the majority of happiness in marriage. Continue the early attentions. And here's another on Adventist Home 108. It is the little attentions, the numerous small incidents, and simple courtesies of life that make up the sum of life's happiness. Whether you're married or not, this principle is true. But it's the little things that people do that makes life happy. And so if you're someone that's always doing nice things for other people, then it's going to make yourself happy as well as them. And it is the neglect of kindly, encouraging, affectionate words and the little courtesies of life which helps compose the sum of life's wretchedness. It's all these little tiny things. The way we say it, what we say, whether we say it at all, whether we do something for someone else or not. All those little attentions, that's what makes marriage truly happy. So here are 10. There's a lot more we could share, but here are 10 of the secrets of a happy marriage. And because I give the class, I have tried my best to follow these. In closing, I want to share one more piece of good news I've learned about my wife. I found out she was a very giving person. She just loved to do something for other people. And in fact, this very week, she made 3 pies and took it to 3 different people. And she's always doing that, always doing things for people. And I tend to be a little more on the selfish side. And so it's been a tremendous blessing to see that, she's continually wanting to do things for people. And so as we consider the subject this month of marriage, I'm sure the reason the subject was assigned is to assist the marriages at Wildwood becoming the kind of marriages that God wants us to have. I mean, why have a poor marriage? There's no reason for it. I'm sure you've heard stories of those that were on the brink of divorce, and they decided to work on their marriage, and they developed a happy marriage. In fact, one couple that shared that with us, they go around giving marriage seminars now to help other people, and they were on the brink of divorce. So God doesn't want anybody at Wildwood to think about divorce, but instead to put these principles into place, and you can have the kind of marriage that you dreamed about, that you hoped that you would have, you can have it. And also to the singles, I would say, not too many people are willing to do what we studied tonight, so you better be willing to do it or don't get married, because you will suffer the same way that a lot of others are suffering if you don't put these things into practice.